Hey friends, welcome back to the Maranatha Global Bible Study on the book of Revelation. This is now session 27. In last week's session, we began looking at chapter 10, and specifically looking at the mighty angel that is described in chapter 10. The title of last week's session was Identifying the Mighty Angel Who Comes from Heaven Clothed with the Clouds. Now we're going to continue that discussion. We're going to continue to look at this powerful mighty angel, as well as a few key elements of chapter 10, different things that we didn't get to last week. So the title of this session is The Mighty Angel with a Voice Like a Lion. So we're going to continue to look at just this absolutely beautiful prophetic picture of this mighty angel, which in last week's session I argued that we should understand this mighty angel to actually be the angel of the Lord, to be Yahweh the Son, to be Jesus himself, again, using language, images, motifs that should cause us to be thinking about the return of the Lord, the coming of Yahweh from heaven to save his people. There's a lot of images and language, again, that would cause us to look at it this way. So just for a brief review, we're looking at a mighty angel, a powerful angel, specifically coming down from heaven, as Yahweh has been promising, essentially from the beginning. Even seventh from Adam, Enoch prophesied, behold, the Lord comes, right, to deal out vengeance and punishment against the wicked, as is then referenced in Jude 14 and 15. This angel is clothed with the clouds, or clothed with a cloud, as Jesus comes back in the clouds, as Yahweh appeared to Israel throughout their history in the cloud, in the pillar of cloud, fire by night, cloud by day. He has face shining like the sun, as Jesus himself is described elsewhere, both in the New Testament and in the book of Revelation, in the Gospels as well as the book of Revelation. He has feet like fire. Elsewhere, Jesus is described as having feet like burnished bronze. He has a rainbow around his head, which we saw is often described as being around the throne of God. It's also the first covenant sign that appeared in the clouds, all the way back in Genesis. And now we're adding this element that he has a voice like a lion. So we want to begin just by rereading the text to refamiliarize ourselves, verse 1 through 3, chapter 10, verse 1 through 3. I saw another strong angel coming down out of heaven. Again, he's coming out of heaven. He's clothed with a cloud. The rainbow was upon his head. His face was like the sun. His feet are like pillars of fire. It's just point after point after point. Each one of these descriptions should cause us to be thinking, okay, is this describing the return of Jesus? Is it describing the coming of Yahweh? His feet are like pillars of fire. He had in his hand a little book, a little scroll. Okay, it's not a book, it's a scroll. At the time that this was written, there were not books yet. They didn't have books with pages. They had scrolls, and they would sew them together and roll them up. So he has a little scroll, and it was open. He placed his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. We're going to deal with that in some detail. It's an incredibly important detail. And he cried out with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. Okay, his voice is like a roaring lion. And when he had cried out, the seven peals of thunder uttered their voices. That's an incredibly mysterious portion of the text, and we're going to look at that. So we want to begin with this statement in verse 2a. He had in his hand a little scroll, which was open. Now in the Greek, the word there, scroll, is biblaridion. Okay, so you can kind of see Bible, where the word Bible came from, sort of in the etymology, the historical development. It actually goes back to the Greek, biblaridion, which really just means scroll. Today you could say book, but it was a scroll. Now it was open, okay? This is very important because the vision, the revelation begins with this scroll that's sealed with 7 seals, right? But here the scroll is open. So now, among commentators, there's going to be a variety of opinions. Some see it as a completely different scroll. It's different than the previous scroll that the Son of Man, that Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who was found worthy, okay, back in Revelation 5, which we'll actually read because it's important sort of backdrop to understand what's being said here. Some would say it's a completely different scroll other than the scroll, the one that Jesus himself opened. Some actually see it interestingly, or some have asked or suggested, could this be the scroll that is referenced in Daniel, where Daniel in chapter 11 is told, seal up the revelation. And then it says, many will go to and fro, knowledge will increase. Now, for what it's worth, in my opinion, that's a completely different deal. That's Daniel's vision. The command to seal up what was given was concerning the visions that Daniel was given. And when it says, many will go to and fro, knowledge will increase, the inference or the context is specifically with reference to many carefully going back and forth, studying, going to and fro, back and forth over the words of the revelation. And in a weird way, although it's sealed, it would gradually be opened. Knowledge of it would increase, sort of gradually, but yet, of course, if something's sealed, there has to be a certain point where it's opened. And so the idea is that it's sealed up until the end. Again, I would argue that that's a completely different scroll. So other commentators would simply see this open scroll as the previous scroll, okay? It was sealed up with 7 seals. Jesus is the one who is worthy. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy. And he opened it, and now the scroll is open, which adds to the argument that this powerful, mighty angel coming from heaven, clothed with clouds, face shining like the sun, it adds to the argument that this is Yahweh the Son. This is Jesus. He's still holding the scroll that he opened. Now, of course, you would say, but wait a minute, this is a little scroll. The other one is not described as little. Again, he's a mighty angel. It's in context to how massive and giant he is in his hand. It seems like a little scroll. It seems like a tiny scroll. You know, size is very much relative, right? The sun, you know, when you set that up next to the earth seems pretty big until you set it next to the sun, etc. Like, you get the idea. And I personally believe that this scroll is indeed the previous scroll that was being opened by Jesus. I would argue that the contents of the scroll concern all of the things that have already been previously described, the opening of the seals, the blasting of the trumpets, as well as the events that yet to have to be fulfilled, the events that we'll continue to look at as we continue to study the book of Revelation together. So this is simply the scroll that the whole thing started with. Now, again, for a bit of backdrop, let's start with Revelation chapter 5. Let's sort of jump back and just reread this because, as I said, this is a foundational information. This portion of the text is foundational to understand what's happening here in chapter 10. Both sections, Revelation 5 as well as 10, are referred to by commentators as interludes. They're parenthetical sections. As these things are being shown and revealed and described, there are sort of these like parentheses where something else is described, and then it sort of gets back to the narrative. So both chapter 5 here as well as 10 are considered to be parenthetical segments of the book of Revelation. So in verse 1, again, chapter 5, verse 1 through 7, John the Apostle says, I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne, okay, Yahweh the Father, he who sits on the throne, written inside and on the back, sealed up with 7 seals. So he sees the Lord himself, God Almighty, Yahweh the Father, sitting on the throne, holding this scroll sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy? He's asking, who is worthy to open the Biblaridion, right? To open the scroll, to break its seals. Who is worthy? And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the book or to even look into it. This is a scroll that no one is even worthy to look into it. And we're talking about it right now. Then I began to weep greatly because no one was found worthy. No heroes other than the Lion of the tribe of Judah. No one was found worthy to open the book or to look into it. And then one of the 24 elders said to me, stop weeping. Behold, the Lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of, it starts quoting, making Old Testament references, the root of David. He has overcome. He was dead. He came back, right? He laid down his life. He has overcome so as to open the book and its 7 seals. And I saw between the throne with the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb. So here's the lamb. He's the lion and the lamb. He's standing as if slain. He is the sacrificial Passover lamb, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. Very unusual lamb. Okay, this is the Passover lamb. Think about it. He has 7 horns, 7 eyes. Okay, this would be front page of the tabloid internet newspapers if there was a lamb that was born with 7 eyes and 7 horns. Freakish, okay? But again, this is symbolic. This is symbolic in nature. It's intended to communicate. As we're talking about God, he's standing before the 7 lampstands. He's got 7 eyes, 7 horns, etc., etc. 7 is the number of perfection. And then it says, which are the 7 spirits of God. Now, you go, wait, I thought we believe in a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Yes, the 7 spirits are God. We could say they're different characteristics of the Lord, different facets of who he is. And you could technically go on. You could describe hundreds of different elements of what the Spirit represents. But the Lord himself chooses to use 7 to identify God himself. Okay, both Jesus and the Spirit, sent out into all the earth. He came and he took the book out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. So who takes the scroll? Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lamb, the worthy one. He now has the scroll in his hand. So that's important backdrop, because then when we get here, you see this mighty angel, he's holding the scroll. Again, adding to the argument that this is in fact Yahweh the Son, Jesus, the Lamb of God, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And once more, the language and the imagery is intended to convey thoughts of his return. I'm not saying this is necessarily describing his return. I would view this, personally, in the form of like when you have a dream. Elements of the dream are not intended to be understood literally. They don't always make sense, but it's a picture that's communicating a deeper spiritual reality. This picture that John sees here, I would argue, is intended to communicate the powerful, deeper spiritual reality of the return of Jesus, because it uses very return of Jesus-like imagery, but it's not conveyed in such a way that we go, this is exactly what it's going to look like when we're here on the earth and literally see him return. I would argue that Revelation 19, which we'll get to, is a much closer literal description of his return, although even that, there are elements of it that are abbreviated, truncated, and that are symbolic and so forth. But again, we're going to get to that later. So this is intended to convey and communicate thoughts of the return of Jesus himself, the coming of Yahweh from heaven. So once more, the scroll is simply the open scroll, still presently in the hands of Jesus, the Lion from the tribe of Judah. And once more, its contents contain all that has already transpired as well as that which is yet to be fulfilled. Very simply. Could be wrong. People really, I find when it comes to the book of Revelation, there's sort of this strange, psychological pull. People go, no, I think it's a mystery, a secret, and I think I know the secret. There's kind of just this weird thing within humanity that always wants to be the one that knows and unlocks and reveals. And ultimately, it's the glory of kings to, sort of uncover secrets, right? But of course, the secret of the Lord belongs to those who fear him. So there's kind of this yearning among God's people to peer into the secrets of God. I get that. But this desire to be the one and to get credit, I can tell you, I'll just say this, as someone who is well known for being a prophecy teacher and who rubs shoulders with a lot of other prophecy teachers, and I by no means do I want to pick on all prophecy teachers, but over the years I've spoken at a lot of prophecy conferences, and I've rubbed shoulders, or is the term rubbed elbows? I don't know, with a lot of other very well-known, big platform prophecy teachers, as well as much lesser-known prophecy teachers. And one of the things that I have seen over the years quite a few times is what I call the prophet syndrome, which is when someone has this sort of ambitious underlying desire to be recognized as the one that uncovered the mysteries and to be sort of celebrated as the one that finally has the revelation and this type of thing. It's a carnal thing. It's a dangerous thing. Once one assumes the role of being a teacher, and particularly a prophecy teacher, if they begin to embrace that sort of guru persona, that they're called to be a prophet, it's an incredibly dangerous, potentially even soul-destroying thing that can happen to people. And when people embrace it, they quickly they develop a sense of value from the fact that they are the ones that sort of have this inside information. I just want to say it's dangerous, and it's something that can affect all of us. I've personally sort of tried to step back over the years. I've tried to be very introspective and sort of to look out for this. And I've seen it in others, and I've done everything I can, as I'm self-aware, to shun that type of mentality. So again, I don't think there's any great mystery here with the little scroll. I think it's just very straightforward. It's the same scroll that has already been being discussed, and it's almost dangerous to try to over-speculate and try to sort of figure out that it's some other secret thing that needs to be uncovered and only some select, elite, anointed few are going to figure it out, or this type of thing. Okay. Next portion, now we're chapter 10, verse 2b. This is really cool. I'm excited to talk about this. He placed his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. So this is very specific. Now imagine a map of the land of Israel. Okay, his left foot is on the land. His right foot is on the sea. Now, again, if he's this massive angel, essentially his head is in the clouds. I mean, he seems to be just this mighty, powerful angel. What that means is he's facing south. He's looking to the south. Okay, if his foot is on the land of Israel, his right foot is in the Mediterranean. He's facing arguably Egypt or even perhaps Mount Sinai. He's looking to the south. Does that mean anything? Is there something worth teasing out of that? There's one great Bible teacher that I know that has suggested perhaps, he sort of just hints at it, perhaps this could be causing us to think about Isaiah 19. One of the great end-time prophecies in Isaiah deals extensively with Egypt and many of the profound prophetic events that will unfold in the last days in the land of Egypt, a mighty revival. All sorts of economic disasters, the drying up of the Nile. It's fascinating, even at the very week that I'm recording this, there's news articles about how further south, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is beginning to fill up. Okay, this is right on the border of Sudan and Ethiopia, and there's sort of war drums beating between Egypt and Ethiopia because it could potentially diminish the height or the depth of the Nile River in Egypt. So here is the most populous Arab nation in the world, roughly approximately 90 million Arabs who subsist off of the Nile River. And the diminishing of the Nile, even a little bit, could drastically destroy their economy. And these are all things that Isaiah 19 talks about. So again, one Bible teacher speculates perhaps he's intending to cause us to sort of look to Egypt. It's a bit speculative, but it's interesting. And we could even speculate perhaps he's even looking south to Sinai because the book of Revelation has such Exodus-rich sort of underpinnings. Others would say, well, the land represents Israel, the sea represents the Gentiles, and what this really means is that he is sovereign over all the earth, both Israel, his people, and the Gentiles. He's sovereign over all the earth, and that's sort of what it's conveying. Okay, another possible reference is that it's intending to communicate thoughts of the Lord exerting power over the seas, that it's intended to communicate thoughts of the ultimate, the final, or the second Exodus. What do I mean by that? Okay, so when we understand the story of redemption, the biblical narrative, okay, if we're to envision the biblical narrative as it's unfolded throughout history, there really are, I'm going to say, 4 primary mountain peaks within redemptive history, towering, massive peaks. The first is creation. Okay, that's the big mountain at the beginning of the story. If you're looking at the beginning of the story, Genesis, you've got this huge mountain, the story of creation. And what happens in creation? God himself is hovering over the deep, the chaos, the tehom, the tohu avohu. I don't know if I said that right in Hebrew, right? Like the wild and waste. And then he separates the waters above from the waters below. He brings order. And this language of the chaos, this language of the ocean, in the mind of an ancient Middle Easterner, the ancient Jew, an ancient, Hebrew, this would have conjured up thoughts of the Lord exerting control over the realm of Satan himself. Now, creation was not just this cosmic conflict between good and evil, this yin and yang, equal evil, equal good. No, God is sovereign way over Satan. Like it's not even a contest. But again, Satan is referred to as Leviathan, the dragon, the serpent. We see that in Revelation. We'll talk about that some more. And his realm is in the ocean. He's the sea monster. He's the sea dragon. And so when the Lord brings order to the chaos, and when he separates the waters above from the waters below, he separates dry land from the oceans, he's essentially demonstrating his sovereignty over the realm of the deep, the crazy, unexplored oceans that the ancient Hebrews would have been really terrified of. So that's the first mountain. The second great mountain in the story of redemption is the Exodus. That is the towering mountain, which of course culminates, the story of the Exodus culminates where? At Mount Sinai. It culminates at a mountain. And what happens there? God comes down. And sort of central to the narrative of the Exodus is what? God splits the sea. He separates the waters. He saves his people. So you have the separating of the waters at the beginning, God demonstrating his power. You have the separating of the waters once again during the Exodus, which is a prototype, a foreshadow, a foundational historical picture of what? The ultimate return of Jesus, the ultimate redemption, the second Exodus. Now, I said 4 mountains. The third mountain would be the first coming of Jesus. In a way, you could say the coming of the Messiah is sort of 2 peaks. You've got the first coming, and I would argue his second coming is a much bigger peak yet to come. So again, creation, the Exodus, and then the coming of God from heaven. Those are the 3 primary places where the imagery of God exerting his sovereignty over the ocean, the Tehom, the chaos, the realm of Satan, and defeating ultimately Satan, defeating Leviathan. These are the 3 periods of history of which the return of Jesus is the ultimate. Okay, I know that's sort of using biblical cosmology. It's sort of using slightly confusing language. Prophetic, poetic language. Again, in the beginning, God separated the waters. He brought order to the chaos. He demonstrated his power and his sovereignty. During the Exodus, the Lord separated the waters once again. He demonstrated his power over the satanic empire of the Egyptians and their great armies, and he saved his people. When Jesus returns once again, he will save his people. Now, here is the fascinating question. When Jesus returns, when the ultimate Exodus happens, will Jesus split the sea yet again? And I think there's actually some pretty strong biblical evidence that he will. Now, I could spend an entire session talking about this, but I just want to throw out a few passages that seem to indicate this, sort of the Old Testament backdrop, to help us understand why this picture of him standing with 1 foot in the sea and 1 foot on the land, assuming, of course, that it's the Mediterranean Sea. His foot could be in the Nile. It's hard to know. I mean, his foot could be in the Red Sea, and 1 sea on the land, which very well may actually be where he's standing. But the first verse I want to look at, beyond just sort of that larger backdrop that I just laid out, again, the language throughout the Exodus of him splitting the sea, and then it uses that language again in the future. And it actually talks about, like Ezekiel, for example, I don't have the verses in here, I believe it might be 25, where he actually talks about slaying Pharaoh, and then sort of interchanges the language of slaying the sea monster Leviathan and leaving his body out in the desert. It almost interchanges, almost like a parallelism, language of Pharaoh and Leviathan. Why? Because Pharaoh at the time was Satan's sock puppet. He was a precursor to the Antichrist, Satan's ultimate sock puppet. Isaiah 10, verse 26. Again, it uses historical events as prototypes, as patterns, as shadows of the ultimate final deliverance. And that's what's happening here. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of hosts, O my people who dwell in Zion, don't fear the Assyrian. The Assyrian was a historical enemy, a historical threat, but he was also a prototype for the Antichrist. He becomes a pattern. The Antichrist, in fact, is called the Assyrian. He says, don't fear the Assyrian who strikes you with a rod and lifts up his staff against you the way Egypt did. Like in the same way that Pharaoh tried to kill you, here is another reiteration of a satanic sock puppet, the Assyrian. Don't fear him. Remember what happened to Pharaoh. And then he says this, for in a very little while, my indignation against you will be spent, and my anger will be directed to their destruction. So the Lord raises up pagan, foreign dictators as his rod of chastisement. When he becomes angry with his people, he says, I'm going to raise up another Pharaoh, another Assyrian, another Nebuchadnezzar. I'm going to raise up a rod of chastisement, the Chaldean, the Babylonian. But then when his anger is spent against his people, he breaks that rod of chastisement over his knee, and he punishes the people that he used as his own rod of chastisement. That's how sovereign he is. He says, my anger will be directed toward their destruction. You know, even though he uses them in his sovereignty, he still judges them for their wickedness. The Lord of hosts will arouse a scourge against him. Who? Against the Assyrian. So yes, historical. Ultimately, the context, the prophetic context, is talking about the Antichrist. The Lord of hosts will arouse a scourge against him, just like what? The slaughter of Midian at the rock of Oreb. So this is when Zebah and Zalmunna, Oreb and Zebah and Zalmunna were destroyed in Judges, I think it's 5 or 8, under Gideon. He says it's going to be just like that. And then he says this, here's the powerful statement. And the Lord's staff will be over the sea, and he will lift it up the way he did in Egypt. So again, here's Isaiah years after the Exodus. And he says, the day is coming when I'm going to slaughter the Assyrian. I'm going to punish him when my anger toward you is spent. And there's been cycles of this throughout history where Israel, the Lord chastises them because of their rebellion. And then he brings them back to himself. Chastisement is unto restoration. The ultimate chastisement is Jacob's trouble. It's yet in the future. This picture, again, it has historical connotations, but its ultimate meaning is concerning the Antichrist in the future, in the last days. And when that happens, the Lord says his staff will be over the sea. What sea? The Red Sea. And he will lift it up in the same way, just like he did back during the Passover, just like he did during the Exodus, right? So here's sort of a hint. During the ultimate Exodus, when Jesus returns, when Yahweh comes back from heaven to save his people, to destroy the Antichrist, he says, once again, I'm going to lift up my staff against the sea, just like the first Exodus. You go, okay, that's interesting, because it's yet future. We have no evidence that he did this historically with the northern kingdom of Israel when they were being invaded by the Assyrian, right? We have no historical correlation there. Rather, I would argue it should be pointing to the last days, the return of Jesus, the ultimate Exodus, the final Exodus. There's so many parallels between the return of Jesus and the first Exodus. Jesus, in many ways, he's the greater Moses that will once again split the Red Sea. He's the greater Gideon that will destroy the armies of the Antichrist. He's the greater David that will enter the promised land and reestablish the throne of his father David, on the throne of his father David, etc., etc. Now let's look at Isaiah 11, verse 15. In that day, it's using clear messianic language, the age of the Messiah, millennial language during the millennial reign. Talking about Jesus. He will lift up a standard for the nations. Talking about the Messiah. He will assemble the banished ones of Israel, and he will gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So after he returns, he will regather all of the dispersed exiles of Judah. Skipping forward, the Lord will utterly destroy. So it's in the context of the restoration of the Davidic kingdom, the restoration of Israel, the regathering of the captives. Again, the final return from exile. Not like it was during the Passover, but rather the future one that the prophets have been talking about, the ultimate regathering under the Messiah. The Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. There it is again. In the context of the return of the Messiah, in the context of the regathering of Israel, here it is again, Isaiah talking about the Lord judging the Red Sea. And it calls it the tongue of the sea of Egypt. And he will wave his hand over the river with a scorching wind. He will strike it into multiple or 7 streams. And then he will make men walk over it dry shod. just like the first Exodus. He says the day is coming. In the context of the return of the Messiah, once again, he's going to split the Red Sea, the tongue of the Sea of Egypt. So, again, I would say a second hint that there's much more to the return of Jesus than just this appearing from heaven, waving a magic wand, and it's all over. That the return of Jesus should be understood as the second or greater Exodus. Now let's look at this. Habakkuk chapter 3. Habakkuk, as I've talked about this in the past, I deal with it in great detail in my book, Sinai to Zion. Habakkuk 3 is one of the most detailed, glorious visions of the return of Jesus in all of the Bible, certainly in the Old Testament. It's a beautiful picture about the return of Jesus. And so in verses 8 through 15, first, in the previous verses, it's describing Yahweh as marching through the desert of the Exodus, saving his people, pouring out rays out of his hand. Plagues and pestilences go before him and behind him. He's marching majestically. He surveys the earth, right? The majestic one, the same picture we see in Isaiah 63. We see it in Deuteronomy 33, Judges 5. We see it in Psalm 68. We see it in Zechariah 12 and 14, chapter 9. The Lord God will appear over them, it says in chapter 9. He will march in the whirlwinds or the storm winds of the south. From the south which is where the Exodus took place. So now we're skipping forward. We're here at verse 8. And Habakkuk says, did the Lord, so it's in the context of his return, this majestic march from the south. Habakkuk says, did the Lord rage against the rivers? Or was your anger against the rivers? Or was your wrath against the sea? That you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation. I want to stop here for a second and, as usual, go on a little bunny trail. We're going to get here later, and I want to discuss this again when we get there in chapter 9 in much more detail. But in chapter 19. In Revelation 19, it describes Jesus as returning on a horse, armies of heaven following him on horses. The Old Testament, the primary Old Testament backdrop for that are some of the passages in Deuteronomy 30 through 33, where it describes Yahweh coming and riding on horses. But here in Habakkuk, it describes him riding on horses. You rode on your horses, but then it interchanges, again, as a parallelism, chariots. What's interesting about this, and I don't want to go down this path too much, Ezekiel 1, as well as some other passages in Ezekiel. These are the freaky passages, that all the UFO people like to read. It's kind of it's very acid trippy, right? Like, here's this throne, the wheels, they're covered with eyes. Wherever, they look, the throne goes. The throne of God itself, it's in Hebrew, it's the Merkaba or Merkaba. It's a chariot throne. It's not just like a seat. It's not like just a seat that you sit on, like a throne. It's a chariot. It's a chariot throne. And so what's so fascinating is that not only is the throne of God described interchangeably as a chariot, when Jesus returns, he's described as interchangeably riding horses or riding chariots. Psalm 68 talks about this. I don't want to go down this road in too much detail, but what's interesting is on Shavuot, Pentecost, the reading that the Haftorah that the Jews read, the scriptural reading of Shavuot, the first day, is Ezekiel 1, the Merkaba passage, which describes the throne of God, the chariot throne. Day 2 is Habakkuk 3. Okay, so there's a connection between the Lord coming back on his horses. I would argue that it's not just a horse. The picture that we have of Jesus just on a horse is probably a simplified narrative. Again, if we're Old Testament literate, we understand the vision, the overall vision that the Old Testament has painted and described concerning his return. He's coming back on chariots. And yes, there's horses. So you could say either one. To say he's coming back on his horses as the divine king, it's also chariots. And there's a degree to where it's communicating the idea that he's coming back on his throne to reestablish his glorious throne on Mount Zion. So that's sort of some deep stuff, and I know it's sort of bumping up against the edges of some, I'm going to say, Jewish mysticism, and we're not about Kabbalah or any of that, but just making the connections that are really clear between the different motifs and symbols that appear in many of these passages, describing his return. You rode on your horses and on your chariots of salvation. It's beautiful. Chariots of salvation. Your bow was made bare. The rods of chastisement were sworn. You cleave the earth. The earth is split up with rivers. It's using cataclysmic language. The mountains saw you and they trembled. The downpour of waters, like the flood waters, swept by. The deep, the sea, again, the Tehom, the deep, uttered forth its voice, and it lifted high its hands. I love this because in modern times we have hands up, don't shoot, right? Like this popular anti-police protest going back to Michael Brown, the young man that was shot. And they say, well, he was innocent. He had his hands up. Again, I'm not getting into that whole thing, but it's become this sort of mantra. Hands up, don't shoot. Well, here's the sea itself, hands raised. Please, have mercy on me, O sovereign of the universe. And he goes, sorry, I'm about to tear you in half. Once again, the deep utters forth its voice. It lifts high its hands, and it says, hands up, have mercy. The sun and the moon stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows. So again, it's this real beautiful, poetic, prophetic language. At the radiance of your gleaming spear, here it is, in indignation. In indignation, in righteous anger, the Lord marched through the earth. In anger, you trampled the nations. You went forth for the salvation of your people, the salvation of your anointed ones. Here it is. I love this verse. You will, in the future, you will crush, you will strike the head of the house of evil. That's the Antichrist. That's Satan and his sock puppet, to lay him open from thigh to neck, to absolutely decimate him. You pierced him with his own spears, the head of his throngs. They stormed in. Who? The armies, the hordes of the Antichrist. They stormed in to scatter us. Their exultation, their celebration was like those who came in to devour the oppressed in secret. And he says, but you trampled on the sea with your horses, on the surge of many waters. So again, just interwoven in all of this language of Jesus returning, defeating his enemies, saving his people, pouring out his indignation, his wrath, shattering the head of the house of evil. Intermingled into all of this language is all of this victory over the seas, and the Lord judging the seas, and the seas being, the deep being terrified, and him judging and riding over them, trampling them with his horses. In the same way that he will trample and crush the head of Satan, he crushes his realm, if you will, the chaotic, deep, unknown realm of the Leviathan, the sea dragon. And so there's much more to it than that. Again, it would take a whole session. But I would argue that Jesus, as the greater Moses, very likely may actually retrace the steps of the Exodus as he's saving and delivering his people, as he's destroying the armies of the Antichrist. Plagues and pestilences go before him and follow in his wake. As the great one who comes back in righteousness, he judges and makes war. He's delivering his people who are prisoners of war, and he's making procession up through the desert of the Exodus, right? Make a highway through the desert, prepare a highway. He's coming. Like roll out the red carpet for the King, for our God, as it says in Isaiah 35:40, the highway of holiness. Verse 3a, he called out, now back to the angel, back to the majestic, mighty angel who comes from heaven, clothed with the clouds, with a face shining like the sun. He called out with a loud voice, like a roaring lion. What should we think of when we hear this? Someone with a voice like a lion. Going all the way back to Genesis 49, verses 8 through 10, this is the original prophecy given to Judah, that it's from him would come the King of Israel, the promised one. He says, this is Jacob prophesying over his sons. He says, Judah is a young lion. My son, you return from the kill. He crouches, he lies down like a lion or a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? So it's using the language of this fierce predator, this lion. And then he says this, the scepter will not depart from Judah. It's from the line, from the tribe of Judah, the scepter, the royal monarchy, the lineage will not depart, or the staff from between his feet. Now that just doesn't mean just that the staff, he just keeps that, it's a euphemism, from between his legs, from his lineage. That staff will not depart until he whose right hand it is comes. Until there's a quite a few different translations here. Some say until Shiloh comes, until the one that it belongs to, the rightful heir of until he comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. So that's the foundation for the theme of Jesus as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And then, of course, we see it here in Revelation back in chapter 5, verse 5. One of the elders said to me, "Don't weep, look, the Lion from the tribe of Judah." Harking all the way back there to Genesis 49, the root of David, he has conquered. And so he is able to open the scroll. So here he is, the mighty angel, with a voice like a lion, like the Lion of the tribe of Judah, crouches down, ready. He's holding the same scroll that only Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, was found worthy to open. Again, it just all lends itself toward the argument that this is indeed Jesus, the majestic one. When he cried out, the seven thunders raised their voices. What in the world is this talking about? Again, going back to what I was talking about earlier, where there's sort of this determination, this almost emotional need to prove that the little scroll is some other mysterious scroll that needs to be solved. This one little statement has been a magnet for people who want to solve the unsolvable. He cried out, here's one with a voice like a lion. He cries out, the seven thunders raised their voices. Now, God's voice is commonly described as being like thunder throughout the scriptures. Exodus 19:9, Job 37:2, Job 37:4 through 5, Psalm 29, verse 3, John 12:28 through 29. There's multiple places. There's also places where angels also seem to have voices like thunder, okay, or, like the sound of many waters. Even angels sometimes do seem to have. So again, that's not sort of a nail in the coffin, so to speak, but it's something that God is most often commonly described as having a voice like thunder. Now again, Revelation 4, 5 through 6, we've already gone through this. There was flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder coming from the throne. So the throne of God itself is defined by the sound of lightning. And then in front of the throne, 7 fiery torches were burning before the throne. Or you could say 7 lampstands. You've got that previously. You've got the 7 eyes. You've got the 7 horns. Okay, what are the 7 thunders? Are they 7 separate entities? Are they some type of angelic beings? I would argue, again, in keeping with this just consistent theme throughout Revelation, of 7 pointing to Jesus himself, the Lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns, the 7 spirits of God, the 7 lampstands, the 7, etc., that it's pointing toward these just being an extension of God's voice himself. Something was like a sea of glass, similar to crystal, was before the throne. So skipping back here, verse 4, when the 7 peals of thunder had spoken, the voices of thunder. Again, I would just argue that's just simply the Lamb with the 7 eyes and the 7 horns and the 7 spirits of God speaking. And they're speaking in unison, in concert. I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Seal up the things which the 7 peals of thunder have spoken, and do not write them." So this is so strange. Here's John. He hears this 7 thunders speak, and he's about to write it down, and then this voice says, "Actually, don't write that down. We're going to skip that part." And so this is the part that all these people go, "But I know what it is," or "The Lord revealed it to me." In fact, the guy that I got saved at his meeting. He's this deep Southern holiness, Pentecostal, hellfire, brimstone preacher, right? Praise God, I got saved. I needed that to get saved. "The axe at the root of the tree has already been laid, therefore bear fruit in keeping with repentance, for every branch that does not bear fruit will be cast into the fire." He was, and it just, the conviction got me, and I said, "Yes, Lord, my life is on a trajectory toward hell." But this guy actually sort of had a prophet syndrome, and I think he kind of inferred to some of his followers that he might have been Elijah or something, and he claimed that God showed him the mystery of the 7 thunders that only John the Apostle knew. Ooh, it's just, you can hear the pride, you can hear the charlatanism. It just, flee from this type of thing. Those who claim to be the one that has all of the secret mysteries. Just be so careful. Whether you're a teacher or a listener, be careful. Yes, the Lord can use someone like that. I got saved in his meeting. Was he a charlatan? Yeah. Was he a fraud? Yeah. Was he a man of God? In a roundabout way, he was. Life is complicated. The point is this: what are the seven thunders? We don't know. We don't know, and we need to be careful not to speculate. Where the Bible is silent, we should probably be extremely careful, if not also silent. Verse 5 through 7, the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land, okay, the mighty angel, he lifted up his right hand toward heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things in it, and the earth and the things in it, and the sea and the things in it. Now, again, I touched on this last week. Well, how can you say that that's Jesus if he's swearing by God? It's the exact same argument that people make in the Gospels where Jesus prays to God. And people go, well, how can he be God if he prays to God? It's not a problem. Within the Trinity, Jesus himself demonstrates what it means when he took on flesh in the incarnation to be the perfect man. And even within the Trinity itself, there is communication. God speaks from heaven, says, this is my beloved Son, etc., etc. I don't want to redo a whole lecture or tangent on the Trinity. And then here's this statement. He swears. What does he swear? There will no longer be any delay. But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel is the one that blows the seventh trumpet. Dalton's going to hit the seventh trumpet, which is, by the way, it's really later in chapter 11. Okay, so we haven't even got to chapter 11 yet. It's later in chapter 11 where you really see the angel blasting the seventh trumpet. And when he is about to sound, this is a powerful statement, then the mystery of God is finished. Then is finished the mystery of God. And then he adds this statement, which I love, as he preached to his servants, the prophets. It's reminiscent of statements that are made throughout the New Testament. As you declared by the mouth of your holy prophets, the restoration of all things, as was declared by the prophets, etc., etc. The point there is that helps us to understand when it says, what's the mystery of God? It's the same thing that he's been declaring through the prophets from the beginning. It's the culmination of the story of redemption. It's the salvation of all of Israel. It's the end of this wicked age. It's the establishment of the kingdom. So going back to my fairly sort of helter-skelter, I don't want to say schizophrenic, but my Tevye message when I went on one hand, pre-wrath arguments, on the other hand, post-trib arguments, and I kind of went back and forth. This is why both Dalton and I would hold to a seventh trumpet rapture. When he appears from heaven, when Israel looks upon the one they have pierced. And yes, the return of Jesus is a complex series of events that unfolds over a period of time. But it's in the context of the blasting of the seventh trumpet that all of these things seem to culminate, when they seem to be wrapped up. Now, again, I'm going to let Dalton really elaborate on that, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's just such a profound statement. And it's also why this picture of this mighty angel, we should understand it as reflecting and speaking to the actual return of Jesus in prophetic, poetic, pictorial form. Then we have this statement, verse 8 through 11. Then the voice which I heard from heaven, I heard again speaking to me, saying, go take the book which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and on the land. So he goes over to the mighty angel. I went to the angel, telling him to give me the little book. Hey, mighty angel, give me the scroll. Just how big, and he said to me, so here's again, Jesus speaking to John, take it and eat it, devour it, consume it, and it will make your stomach bitter. But in your mouth it will initially be sweet as honey. It's very strange. And I took the little scroll out of the angel's hand and I ate it. And in my mouth, initially, on the front end, it was as sweet as honey. And when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And they said to me, you must prophesy again. You must continue concerning many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. So here's the statement. You have to continue prophesying. Going back to the identification of the scroll, it concerns all of the things that have already been opened, unsealed, and revealed, the seals and the trumpets. We haven't got to the seventh trumpet yet, as well as the things that you must continue to prophesy, the things that remain unfilled. But he says, eat the scroll. What is this talking about? Again, there's a lot of speculation and commentaries in terms of what it means. But to me, it's this prophetic act of assimilating the scroll and the contents of the scroll itself, to where the very message of the book, the culmination of that which all of the prophets have been declaring, the same prophetic message, the gospel itself, which culminates, which leads up to the birth pains, the judgments, the wrath of God being poured out, the chastisement of God leading to the birth, leading to the coming forth of the baby, the restoration of all things, the end of this wicked age, the establishment of his, like all of these things, and all of the heavy, heavy realities that are part of this message. He says to John, assimilate it. Initially, it's going to be sweet. When you receive that mantle and that calling and you receive my word, it's sweet, but it will become bitter in your stomach. It will make you sick. And I might be out in left field. I might be out to lunch with this. And I don't even mean to communicate this in a way that in any way exalts my own ministry or life, but I just know that over the years, as I've very hesitantly, really emotionally, from my part, very hesitantly, cautiously, sort of stepped into the ministry that the Lord has given me, it's been a very strange thing. I observe my life sometimes from the outside looking in and going, that's bizarre. You know, knowing who I am, right? Knowing my history. I mean, just what a total bozo I am. This heavy calling the Lord has given me, and then he expands it, and I get wrapped up in these different sort of mandates and callings, and now I'm all tied up with Mount Sinai and Saudi Arabia and these different things. And there's a sweetness to it. There's a joy in partnering with God and ministering. Like, don't get me wrong, but it comes with an incredible, incredible price. Like, genuinely, I feel as though even my life, the warfare over my family, my children, my wife, and just health and these things, I feel as though somewhere along the line I touched a principality. I didn't mean to. Maybe I am not in prayer enough. You know, I try to be. But it's like when you touch something, you touch real warfare, real resistance from the enemy. It's bitter. It is bitter in your stomach. Likewise, I believe the Lord is calling not just individuals, not just me, not just Dalton, but a whole host of people, as Daniel himself talks about, the masculine, those with understanding. A whole army of people in the last days that will eat the scroll. They'll say, yes, let this message be assimilated into, let me carry the fullness of all that's here. This is a heavy, heavy message, and it will become bitter in our stomachs. If we say yes to it, when we receive it, it will become bitter. But I believe the Lord's calling many of us to say yes. To say, yes, I will eat the scroll. I'll accept that invitation. I'll take it from your hand, and I will be your mouthpiece. I will be your messenger to the best of my ability, walking in the fear of the Lord, walking it out, saying, Lord, the day is coming when I will be held accountable, stand before you, judged for the deeds done in this life, whether good or bad. Lord, help me to be a faithful messenger. So there's a lot more that we could unpack and continue on. I know I've gone long. I'm going to leave it right here. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to go next week. As I said, Dalton's going to pick up on the seventh trumpet, then is finished the mystery of God. Timing-wise, I'm not sure if he's going to jump right in or not, but we're going to hit this issue of the temple, the Jewish temple. Is it going to be rebuilt, or is it just spiritual? We're going to start hitting the two witnesses and then really hit the seventh trumpet. So we've got some really good stuff coming up. So thanks for sticking it out, friends. God bless you all. Look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, have a great week, and Maranatha.